The boardroom fell silent as Desmond Washington walked in his custom-tailored suit, contrasting sharply with their startled expressions. "Gentlemen, we've never formally met," he smiled, sliding the takeover documents across the polished table. "But 3 months ago, your flight attendant said I didn't look like I belonged in first class." Before we dive into this incredible story of justice and transformation, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to catch more stories of resilience and triumph against discrimination. Now let's rewind to see how one airline's mistake became their ultimate undoing. Desmond Washington's day had begun like any other. His overnight bag was perfectly packed for the quick business trip to San Francisco, where he would meet with potential investors for his latest project. At 42, Desmond had mastered the art of business travel, moving through Atlanta's bustling airport with practiced ease, his mind already processing the details of tomorrow's presentation. When he approached the gate for Atlantic Airways Flight 1876, he nodded politely to the gate agent who scanned his first-class boarding pass without looking up. As one of the first passengers to board, Desmond settled into his window seat in the first-class cabin, 2 amperes placing his leather briefcase beneath the seat in front of him. He declined the offered pre-flight champagne instead, requesting still water as he reviewed his notes one final time. The cabin gradually filled with other first-class passengers, predominantly white executives, in business attire similar to his own. Desmond noticed a few glances in his direction, but paid them little mind. After 15 years as a successful investment banker, he was accustomed to being one of the few black faces in premium cabins. A flight attendant approached her name tag reading Brenda Miller. Her smile faltered slightly as she looked at him. "Excuse me, sir. Can I see your boarding pass?" Desmond reached into his jacket pocket and produced the document. Of course. Brenda scrutinized it longer than seemed necessary before returning it. "Thank you, sir." She moved on but returned barely 2 minutes later. "I'm sorry, but could I see some identification as well?" Desmond raised an eyebrow, but complied, presenting his driver's license. Around him, he noted that none of the other first-class passengers were being subjected to the same scrutiny. The woman across the aisle had boarded after him, yet hadn't been asked for verification at all. "Is there a problem?" he asked, calmly. "Just routine checks," Brenda replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. She returned his ID and walked to the front of the cabin, where she whispered something to another flight attendant, Thomas Reed, who glanced back at Desmond with an unreadable expression. Desmond noticed a distinguished older white man in seat 3C watching the interaction with interest. The man wore an expensive watch and had the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Their eyes met briefly before the man returned his attention to his newspaper. Just as the cabin door was about to close, Brenda approached Desmond again, this time with an apologetic but unconvincing smile. "Sir, I'm afraid there's been a computer error with your seating assignment. We need to relocate you to economy." Desmond looked around the cabin, noting 2 empty first-class seats. "I see available seats right here in first class. Those are reserved for our platinum members who might be connecting from delayed flights," Brenda explained, though Desmond knew this wasn't standard airline policy. "I'm a platinum member myself," Desmond replied evenly, "and I've confirmed my first-class seat twice, including at the gate less than 30 minutes ago." The situation was escalating. Thomas now stood beside Brenda, arms crossed. "Sir, we need you to comply with crew member instructions." "I am complying. I'm sitting in my assigned seat," Desmond responded, his voice remaining measured, despite his rising frustration. The older man in 3C was watching intently now, his newspaper lowered. Desmond noticed his embroidered shirt cuffs bore the monogram WP. "If you continue to be difficult, we'll need to call security," Brenda threatened, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Several passengers had begun recording the interaction on their phones. Desmond weighed his options quickly. Making a scene would only reinforce negative stereotypes about black men, regardless of how justified his anger might be. Yet surrendering his rightfully purchased seat felt like accepting injustice. "I'll move to avoid delaying the flight for everyone," Desmond finally said, gathering his belongings with deliberate calm. "But I want it noted that I'm doing so under protest, and I'll be filing a formal complaint about this discriminatory treatment." As he made his way to the economy section, Desmond felt a mixture of familiar disappointment and simmering resolve. This wasn't his first experience with discrimination, but something about this incident, perhaps the public nature of it or the blatant disregard for his status as a paying customer, struck a deeper chord. From his middle seat in economy between two uncomfortable passengers, Desmond observed the flight service throughout the journey. He noticed how white passengers received prompt attention while the few other black passengers had to request service repeatedly. He watched as Brenda cheerfully chatted with the older man from 3C, who appeared to be someone of importance based on her deferential manner. While the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, Desmond recalled similar incidents reported about Atlantic Airways. Just last year, a black doctor had been questioned when responding to a medical emergency on board. 6 months before that, a black executive had been removed from a flight after a white passenger claimed to feel uncomfortable sitting next to him. The airline had issued standard apologies, but clearly hadn't addressed the underlying issues. By the time the plane touched down in San Francisco, what had begun as indignation had crystallized into determination. Desmond Washington didn't just want an apology. He wanted change. And as he stepped into the terminal, he was already formulating a plan that would shake Atlantic Airways to its core. To understand why Desmond Washington was uniquely positioned to challenge Atlantic Airways, one needs to understand his journey, a path defined by both extraordinary talent and the constant headwinds of racial bias. Desmond grew up in South Chicago's Inglewood neighborhood, where his childhood window overlooked both the harsh realities of urban poverty and the distant gleaming towers of financial prosperity. His mother, Eleanor Washington, worked 3 jobs: hospital custodian by day, office cleaner in the evenings, and weekend shifts at a laundromat, to keep their small apartment and put food on the table after his father abandoned them when Desmond was just 4 years old. "Never let someone else define your worth," Eleanor would tell him each morning before school. "Your value isn't determined by what others think of you, but by what you know you can accomplish." Even as a child, Desmond displayed an unusual aptitude for numbers and business. At 12, he organized a neighborhood lawn mowing service, coordinating 5 friends to cover more territory. By 14, he had expanded to snow removal in winter and was managing the schedules and earnings of 8 neighborhood kids. He meticulously tracked expenses, revenues, and profit margins in a worn composition notebook, reinvesting earnings to purchase better equipment. Despite attending an underfunded public school where college counseling was virtually non-existent, Desmond's academic excellence caught the attention of a visiting recruiter from Northwestern University. With his perfect SAT scores and impressive entrepreneurial experience, Desmond secured a full scholarship. At Northwestern, the culture shock was immediate. Most of his classmates came from privileged backgrounds, and many had never interacted closely with a black person outside of service encounters. Professors sometimes expressed surprise at his articulate class contributions, and study groups would subtly exclude him until his consistently top grades made him an asset they couldn't ignore. "I don't need you to believe in me," he told a professor who had suggested he might be more comfortable switching from finance to a less competitive major. "I just need you to grade me fairly." The pattern continued at Harvard Business School, where Desmond attended on a prestigious Baker Scholarship. Despite graduating with distinction, job interviews often began with subtle questions about his cultural fit within prestigious financial institutions. Undeterred, Desmond spent 5 years at Goldman Sachs, where he consistently outperformed peers but was passed over twice for promotions that went to less qualified white colleagues. Rather than fighting a system designed to limit his advancement, he decided to create his own path. In 2008, as financial markets crashed around the world, Desmond took the bold step of founding Zenith Capital Partners with his modest savings and the backing of 2 former clients who recognized his exceptional talent. Starting in a small office with just 2 employees, he built a reputation for identifying undervalued companies with growth potential, particularly in underserved markets. By 2015, Zenith Capital had grown to manage over $1.2 billion in assets. By 2022, that figure had ballooned to $5.8 billion, with Desmond developing a specialty in ethical investment strategies that produced returns consistently outpacing the market. His latest project involved creating an investment fund focused exclusively on companies with proven ethical practices and meaningful diversity initiatives. Not as charity, but because his data showed such companies outperformed their peers in the long term. Throughout his rise, Desmond encountered persistent discrimination. Luxury car dealerships would ignore him until he mentioned his budget. Restaurant hosts would attempt to seat him near kitchens despite available tables by windows. Security guards would follow him in high-end stores. At industry events, people would often mistake him for waitstaff rather than a fellow executive. Desmond developed a method for addressing these slights, never with public confrontation, but with quiet, methodical actions that created lasting consequences. When a country club denied his membership application despite his qualifications, he didn't sue. He purchased the adjacent land and built a more exclusive club that quickly drew away their most prestigious members. When a financial publication consistently overlooked Zenith Capital's accomplishments, he didn't complain. He acquired the magazine and transformed its coverage of minority-owned businesses. Success isn't just about wealth. He often told the interns he mentored many from backgrounds similar to his own. It's about wielding influence for change. Money is merely a tool. The real currency is impact. As his private jet flew him back to Chicago from business meetings, Desmond would sometimes reflect on the contrast between his current life and his childhood, watching planes cross the sky from his apartment window, wondering what it might be like to travel beyond the confines of his neighborhood. He had accomplished what many would consider the American dream, but he remained acutely aware that the path remained unnecessarily difficult for those who looked like him. Desmond had built his career by identifying opportunities others missed and systematically capitalizing on them. As he contemplated the discrimination he'd faced on Atlantic Airways, Flight 1876, he didn't just see an insult to be addressed. He saw a system in need of transformation. And transformation was precisely what Desmond Washington did best. The evening after the flight incident, Desmond stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his San Francisco penthouse, the city lights twinkling below as he held a phone to his ear. His reflection in the glass showed a man outwardly composed, but with eyes burning with purpose. "Jason, I need you to pull together everything we have on the commercial airline industry, particularly Atlantic Airways," he instructed his chief research analyst. "Ownership structure, financial performance, market position, corporate culture, everything. And I want it by morning." Desmond ended the call and opened his laptop. While his team would provide comprehensive analysis, he preferred to begin with his own research. It gave him a framework to better evaluate their findings and often revealed angles others might miss. Atlantic Airways, he discovered, was the third largest carrier in the domestic market with a growing international presence. The airline itself was a subsidiary of Skyward Holdings, a publicly traded company that also owned a regional carrier and a cargo airline. Skyward Holdings stock had performed inconsistently over the past 18 months, with recent quarterly reports showing declining passenger satisfaction scores. Digging deeper into news archives, Desmond uncovered a troubling pattern. In addition to the incidents he'd recalled during the flight, there were at least 7 discrimination lawsuits filed against Atlantic Airways in the past decade. All had been settled out of court with confidentiality agreements, but court filings revealed allegations of systemic racial bias in everything from hiring practices to in-flight service. A search of social media revealed hundreds of complaints from minority passengers describing experiences similar to his own. Many reported being questioned about their first-class tickets moved from premium cabins without explanation or receiving substandard service compared to white passengers. By midnight, Desmond had shifted his focus to Skyward Holdings' executive team. The CEO, Warren Phillips, a 62-year-old former Navy pilot who had risen through the airline's operational ranks, had been leading the company for nearly 9 years. Phillips's official biography portrayed him as a traditional aviation executive who prioritized operational efficiency. His leadership had delivered strong initial results, but performance had plateaued in recent years. A deeper search revealed Phillips' responses to diversity concerns were consistently dismissive. When questioned about the lack of diversity in Skyward's executive team, just one woman and no people of color among 12 executives, Phillips had responded that the company hired based on qualifications, not quotas. When pressed about the discrimination lawsuits, he had characterized them as isolated incidents blown out of proportion. As dawn broke over San Francisco, Desmond's research shifted to Skyward Holdings' financial position. The company's stock had declined 17% over the past year, while competitors had posted gains. Their debt-to-equity ratio was concerning, with major capital expenditures for fleet renewal straining their balance sheet. Most importantly, their shareholder structure revealed potential vulnerabilities. 22% of shares were held by 3 institutional investors who had recently expressed concerns about management's strategic direction. When Desmond's team arrived at his hotel suite at 7 a.m. with their comprehensive analysis, he was already showered, dressed, and reviewing his 5th cup of coffee. The team's findings confirmed his suspicions and added critical details. Skyward is more vulnerable than they appear, explained Jason Chen, spreading financial charts across the conference table. Their liquidity position is tightening and they're seeking additional investment to fund their Asian expansion. Maya Patel Zenith's legal counsel outlined the discrimination cases. The settlements total over $28 million, yet they've implemented no meaningful changes to address the underlying issues. They treat these as PR problems rather than systemic failures. Their major shareholders are growing restless, added Derek Foster, head of investor relations. Jordan Hayes at BlackRock manages a 7.8% stake and has publicly questioned Phillips' leadership 3 times in recent earnings calls. Throughout the morning briefing, Desmond listened intently, occasionally asking incisive questions that probed deeper into specific areas. By noon, the picture was clear. Skyward Holdings had built a corporate culture that tolerated discrimination while facing significant financial and leadership challenges. The company was vulnerable, and Desmond now saw a path forward. "I want a complete analysis of their stock price thresholds and trading patterns," he instructed the team. "Identify all major shareholders and prepare profiles on each board member. I'm particularly interested in anyone who might share our concerns about their corporate culture." "Are we considering an investment position?" asked Jason. Desmond's expression remained neutral, but there was a gleam in his eye that his longtime colleagues recognized, the look that appeared when he had identified an extraordinary opportunity. "Something like that," he replied. "Also find out everything you can about Warren Phillips. I believe he was the distinguished-looking gentleman in seat 3C, the one who watched me being removed from first class without intervening." The monogrammed cuffs on his shirt read WP. That evening, while his team worked on their assignments, Desmond made a phone call to Rachel Torres, a Skyward Holdings board member he'd met at a charity gala the previous year. Their conversation was ostensibly about a sustainable investing conference both would be attending, but Desmond skillfully steered it toward corporate governance challenges. Off the record, Rachel confided after Desmond shared a story about transformation at another company. I've been concerned about our culture at Skyward for some time. Warren built an impressive operation, but his approach belongs to a different era. Several of us on the board have tried to push for changes, but we're outnumbered. Cultural transformation is difficult, Desmond agreed. But when leadership resists necessary evolution, sometimes change needs to come from outside. After the call, Desmond stood at the window again, watching planes take off from San Francisco International Airport, their lights tracing paths into the night sky. One of them was an Atlantic Airways flight, its distinctive blue and silver livery catching the last rays of sunset. His phone chimed with a text from his executive assistant, late-night strategy meeting set up for 10 p.m. in the secure conference room. Desmond sent a simple reply. Perfect. This will take precise execution over the next 3 months. The secure conference room at Zenith Capital's San Francisco offices hummed with energy despite the late hour. 6 of Desmond's most trusted team members sat around a gleaming table, each with laptops open and minds focused on the challenge at hand. We need to move carefully, Desmond began, standing at the head of the table. Our goal isn't just to secure a controlling interest in Skyward Holdings. It's to position ourselves to transform the company's culture from the inside out. Maya, the legal counsel, raised her hand. We'll need to avoid triggering SEC disclosure requirements that would alert Phillips and his team to our intentions. Exactly, Desmond nodded. That's why we'll create a series of separate investment vehicles and keep each individual position below the reporting thresholds. On the digital whiteboard, Derek mapped out the corporate structure. They would establish 4 shell companies, each making purchases small enough to fly under regulatory radar, plus a network of partnered investors who would act independently, but in coordination with Zenith's strategy. What's our timeline? Jason asked, already building a financial model on his laptop. 3 months, Desmond replied. Long enough to execute properly, but quick enough to avoid leaks or shifting market conditions. Have you ever wondered what goes through the mind of someone planning a takeover this complex? Comment 1 if you think Desmond's approach is brilliantly strategic, or 2 if you think it's too risky. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of extraordinary business maneuvers and justice served. But what about the crucial allies Desmond would need to make this plan succeed? Let's see how he built his coalition. The team worked until 3 a.m., refining their approach, identifying potential obstacles, and developing contingency plans. By morning, they had outlined a comprehensive strategy that would allow them to gradually acquire a controlling interest in Skyward Holdings without alerting Phillips or the market to their intentions. The first phase involved reaching out to dissatisfied institutional investors. Jordan Hayes at BlackRock managed nearly 8% of Skyward shares and had publicly expressed frustration with Phillips' leadership. Securing his support would be crucial. 2 days later, Desmond sat across from Hayes in BlackRock's New York offices, both men drinking black coffee as they discussed Skyward's performance. The airline has potential, Hayes acknowledged, but Phillips is too set in his ways. Customer satisfaction is declining, their ESG metrics are abysmal, and they're losing market share to carriers with better corporate cultures. What if there was a path to new leadership? Desmond asked carefully. Hayes studied him for a moment. I'd be interested in hearing about such a path, hypothetically speaking. By the end of the meeting, while nothing explicit had been promised, Desmond had secured what he needed, an understanding that Hayes would be receptive when the time came to formally request his voting support. Similar conversations with other institutional investors followed. Some were immediately supportive, others skeptical. At Fidelity, where Desmond met with a senior portfolio manager, he encountered the subtle racism he'd grown accustomed to in financial circles. It's an interesting proposal, the portfolio manager said, emphasis suggesting otherwise. But aviation is a complex industry. I wonder if your team has the specific expertise required. Our team managed the successful restructuring of Maxitech Industries last year, Desmond replied evenly. Their market cap has since increased 64%. Before that, we led the turnaround at Westfield Manufacturing, resulting in a 38% increase in shareholder value. Would you like me to continue listing our qualifications? The portfolio manager had the grace to look embarrassed, and by meeting's end, another tentative ally had been secured. Financing partners proved equally crucial. Desmond met with investment banks, private equity firms, and high-net-worth individuals who shared his vision for corporate transformation. His pitch was compelling, not just morally but financially. Data showed companies with inclusive cultures and strong anti-discrimination practices consistently outperformed their peers. This isn't just about addressing a personal slight, he told potential partners. It's about creating shareholder value by transforming a company with strong fundamentals but poor cultural practices that are hurting its bottom line. While these high-level discussions continued, Desmond's team executed the technical aspects of their strategy. Shell companies were established in Delaware, Wyoming, and Nevada. Trading algorithms were programmed to purchase small blocks of Skyward stock at optimal price points without creating unusual trading patterns that might trigger attention. A crucial breakthrough came when Desmond reconnected with Rachel Torres, who had emerged as his most valuable source within Skyward's board. Over dinner at a discreet restaurant in Chicago, she provided insights into board dynamics that would prove invaluable. 3 board members are completely loyal to Phillips, she explained. 4 are on the fence, but tend to follow his lead. The remaining 4, including me, have serious concerns about his leadership, but haven't had the leverage to make changes. What would give you that leverage? Desmond asked. Evidence that can't be ignored, she replied without hesitation. The discrimination complaints are always settled confidentially, then buried. Phillips dismisses them as anomalies, rather than symptoms of a systemic problem. The next day, Desmond established an anonymous tip line for Atlantic Airways employees to report discrimination incidents. The response was overwhelming. Flight attendants, gate agents, and customer service representatives detailed a culture where racial bias was normalized and complaints were suppressed. A black flight attendant described being consistently assigned to economy sections, while white colleagues worked in premium cabins. A Hispanic gate agent reported being reprimanded for speaking Spanish to passengers who needed language assistance. A Muslim customer service representative detailed how she was removed from counter positions during high visibility periods. This evidence would be powerful when the time came to challenge Phillips publicly, but Desmond knew it needed to be handled with care. The employees risking their jobs to share these experiences deserved protection. By the end of the first month, Zenith Capital had quietly acquired 4% of Skyward Holdings through its network of shell companies. Partnered investors held another 7%. Combined with the institutional investors who had indicated willingness to support a leadership change, nearly 22% of the company's voting shares were now effectively aligned with Desmond's vision. But challenges remained. Old money investors with traditional views still controlled significant portions of the company. Convincing them to support a black outsider's takeover attempt would require both brilliant financial projections and careful relationship management. Some of these investors have never answered to anyone who looks like me, Desmond told his team during a strategy session. We need to make the financial case so compelling that their biases become irrelevant. The team developed detailed models showing how addressing Skyward's discriminatory practices would reduce legal costs, improve employee retention, enhance customer satisfaction, and ultimately increase profitability. These projections, backed by comprehensive data from similar corporate transformations, became Desmond's most powerful tool in winning over skeptical investors. As the second month began, their positions strengthened daily. Additional shares were secured, relationships with key stakeholders deepened, and the infrastructure for a potential proxy fight was established if necessary. What Desmond couldn't know was that their careful work was about to face its first significant test. Someone had noticed the unusual trading patterns in Skyward Holdings stock, and Warren Phillips was about to be alerted that something unusual was happening with his company. Warren Phillips slammed his fist on his mahogany desk, causing his executive assistant to flinch despite 17 years of experience with his temper. "What do you mean, unusual trading patterns? Who's buying our stock?" The chief financial officer shifted uncomfortably. "That's the issue, sir. We can't identify a single large purchaser. It's numerous small acquisitions through various entities, none large enough to trigger SEC reporting requirements." Phillips ran a hand through his silver hair, a habit when frustrated. "This has the hallmarks of someone trying to build a position without alerting us. Get Simmons on this." Gerald Simmons was Skyward's head of corporate intelligence, a former FBI agent who specialized in complex financial investigations. Within 48 hours, Simmons had identified several shell companies making purchases, but ownership remained obscured through layers of corporate structures. His preliminary report noted only that the pattern suggested a sophisticated actor with significant financial resources. Phillips didn't wait for complete information before implementing defensive measures. He directed the board to adopt a poison pill provision that would dilute stock if any single entity acquired more than 15% of outstanding shares. He instructed the investor relations team to reach out to major shareholders, reinforcing the company's commitment to its current strategic direction. At Zenith Capital's Chicago headquarters, Desmond received news of these maneuvers with calm interest rather than alarm. He had anticipated such defenses. "They're reacting exactly as expected," he told his team during their daily strategy call. "Their poison pill actually helps us. It forces us to build a broader coalition rather than simply buying control. That approach will create more sustainable change in the long run." Jason looked concerned. "But they're actively investigating. Eventually, they'll identify us." "We're not doing anything illegal," Desmond reminded him. "We're exercising our right as investors to purchase shares in a public company. The longer we remain anonymous, the better positioned we'll be when our identity does become known." The team accelerated contingency plans. Legal documentation was prepared for a potential proxy fight. Communications specialists drafted messaging for various scenarios. Operational experts developed detailed plans for leadership transition and cultural transformation once control was secured. Meanwhile, Desmond continued building relationships with institutional investors, emphasizing Skyward's potential under new leadership. Jordan Hayes at BlackRock became an increasingly important ally, discreetly connecting Desmond with other institutional investors concerned about Skyward's performance. A new complication emerged when financial journalist Alicia Bennett published an article in the Wall Street Journal noting the unusual trading activity in Skyward Holdings stock and speculating about a possible takeover attempt. The article triggered a 7% spike in the stock price as market speculators began purchasing shares. "Bennett's getting too close," Maya warned during an emergency strategy session. "If she identifies us, Phillips will have time to mount a more effective defense." Desmond considered his options carefully. Misleading a journalist went against his principles, but complete transparency would jeopardize their strategy. He decided on a middle path. "Arrange a background discussion with Bennett," he instructed Derek. "We'll provide context on why Skyward might be attractive to potential investors without confirming our involvement." The conversation with Bennett proved both risky and valuable. She was sharp, immediately asking if Zenith Capital was behind the unusual trading. "I'm not confirming or denying anything specific," Desmond replied carefully. "But I will say that companies with strong fundamentals but poor corporate cultures often represent untapped value. Transformational investors look for exactly that combination." Bennett studied him intently. "Would discrimination issues like passengers being removed from first class based on race qualify as the kind of cultural problems you're describing?" The specific reference to his experience surprised Desmond, though he maintained his composed expression. Bennett clearly had sources within Atlantic Airways. "Hypothetically, yes. Discrimination creates legal liability. damages brand reputation, reduces customer loyalty, and undermines employee morale. Addressing such issues isn't just ethically right, it's financially sound. The resulting article didn't name Zenith Capital but discussed how ethical investment strategies were increasingly targeting companies with problematic cultures. It was enough to further spook Phillips and his team without revealing Desmond's hand. The most dangerous moment came when Lucas Reed, a junior analyst at Zenith, who hadn't been briefed on the full strategy, mentioned the Skyward position during a conversation with a college friend who worked at a competing investment firm. Within days, the information reached Phillips through industry channels. Phillips immediately directed Simmons to investigate Zenith Capital and Desmond Washington personally. The resulting profile landed on Phillips' desk with a personnel file photo of Desmond that Phillips recognized immediately. "He was on one of our flights," Phillips muttered, the memory surfacing. "There was some issue with his seating." Simmons nodded. "Flight 1876 from Atlanta to San Francisco 3 months ago. He was removed from first class despite having a valid ticket." Phillips waved dismissively. "Standard procedure when there's confusion about seating." According to the report, 2 first-class seats remained empty throughout the flight, Simmons noted carefully. Phillips' face darkened. "You think he's targeting us because of that one minor customer service issue and he launches a takeover? The incident may have been a catalyst rather than the cause," Simmons suggested. "Washington has a history of addressing discrimination through strategic business moves rather than public confrontation." Phillips made a dismissive sound. "He's about to learn that playing in the airline industry is different from whatever small-time deals he's used to." He reached for his phone. "Get me a meeting with Washington. Private, off the record." As Phillips launched his counteroffensive, Skyward Holdings issued a press release dismissing takeover rumors and announcing a superficial customer service excellence initiative. The stock price fluctuated wildly as market analysts debated whether the company was genuinely improving its operations or simply responding to acquisition pressure. For Desmond, the most significant personal cost came in his relationship with his girlfriend, Tanya Brooks. The intense schedule and secretive nature of the Skyward project meant canceled plans and vague explanations. "This is the 3rd dinner you've missed this month," she said during a late-night phone call. "I understand your work is important, but so is our relationship." "You're right," Desmond acknowledged. "This particular project requires unusual focus right now, but it won't always be this way." "That's what you said during the Maxi Tech acquisition," Tanya reminded him. "I'm beginning to think this intensity isn't a phase, it's who you are." The conversation ended unresolved, adding personal strain to the professional pressure Desmond was navigating. Yet, despite these obstacles, Zenith's position continued to strengthen. By the end of the 2nd month, they controlled 16% of Skyward Holdings through various channels, with supportive institutional investors holding another 18%. Phillips' request for a meeting presented both risk and opportunity. A direct confrontation would force Desmond to reveal his strategy earlier than planned, but it would also give him the chance to measure Phillips personally, to understand the man whose corporate culture had allowed discrimination to flourish. After consulting with his team, Desmond agreed to the meeting, choosing the venue carefully. They would meet not at either company's offices, but at the Metropolitan Club, an exclusive venue where Phillips was a long-standing member. What Desmond didn't anticipate was that this choice would lead to yet another incident of discrimination, one that would dramatically alter the power dynamics between himself and Phillips just as their corporate chess match approached its critical phase. The Metropolitan Club occupied the top 2 floors of a historic Chicago skyscraper, its entrance marked by nothing more than discreet brass plaque and a uniformed doorman. Founded in 1891, the club had only begun accepting black members in 1995, and even now, its membership remained overwhelmingly white and male. Desmond arrived precisely at 7:00 p.m. for his 7:15 meeting with Phillips, dressed in a charcoal Tom Ford suit that had been tailored to perfection. Despite his reservation and the club's strict dress code compliance, the maitre d' regarded him with thinly veiled suspicion. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't see your name on our guest list," the man said after a deliberately prolonged search through his leather-bound book. "Please, check again," Desmond replied evenly. "Desmond Washington, guest of Warren Phillips, at 7:15. Mr. Phillips is indeed expected, but there's no guest noted," the maitre d' insisted, despite the reservation clearly visible upside down from Desmond's position. Rather than arguing, Desmond took out his phone and dialed Phillips directly. "Warren, I've arrived at the Metropolitan Club, but they seem to have misplaced my reservation." Phillips' voice carried a note of satisfaction. "How unfortunate. Perhaps we should reschedule." "That won't be necessary," Desmond replied smoothly. "I'll wait for you in the lobby." He ended the call and took a seat in one of the lobby's leather armchairs, ignoring the maitre d's discomfort. Desmond recognized the power play for what it was. Phillips attempting to establish dominance by making him wait in the lobby like a supplicant, rather than meeting his equals in the dining room. When Phillips arrived 20 minutes later, he found Desmond not anxiously waiting, but calmly conversing with Judge William Harrington, one of the club's most respected members and a longtime mentor of Desmond's from his Harvard days. The judge had happened to enter the lobby just minutes after Desmond was denied entry. Warren Judge Harrington greeted Phillips with a coolness that suggested their history was complicated. "I see you're meeting with Desmond. Excellent choice. He's one of the brightest financial minds I've encountered in 40 years on the bench." Phillips's attempt to unbalance Desmond had backfired spectacularly. Instead of appearing powerful, he now seemed petty, particularly when the judge personally escorted them to a prime table in the dining room, overriding the maitre d's earlier obstruction. Once seated, Phillips dispensed with pleasantries. "Let's be direct, Washington. You're attempting to acquire control of my company because of a minor seating issue on one of our flights." Desmond regarded him calmly. "Is that your understanding of the situation?" "What else could it be? You were inconvenienced, and now you're pursuing some misguided revenge fantasy. I'm prepared to offer a generous settlement for any perceived discrimination. First-class tickets for life, perhaps." Desmond smiled slightly. "My interest in Skyward Holdings has nothing to do with free tickets, Warren. It's about addressing a corporate culture that tolerates systematic discrimination while delivering subpar returns to shareholders." Phillips' face flushed. "We've had a few isolated customer service incidents, nothing systematic. And our financial performance has underperformed the industry average for 9 consecutive quarters," Desmond finished for him. "Your stock price has declined 17% in a market where your competitors have seen double-digit growth. Employee turnover is at an all-time high. Customer satisfaction scores have dropped for 3 years running. Every airline faces challenges," Phillips dismissed. "Skyward remains a strong company with loyal shareholders who appreciate steady leadership." "Some of your largest shareholders disagree," Desmond replied. "They've expressed concerns about both your operational strategies and your repeated failure to address discrimination complaints." Phillips leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Listen to me carefully. The airline industry has been run by the same type of people for decades. The major players know each other, trust each other. You will never be accepted in those circles, regardless of how many shares you acquire." "That sounds remarkably like the argument used to keep clubs like this exclusively white for most of their history," Desmond observed. Phillips' expression hardened. "I've built this company over 9 years. I won't let an outsider with a grudge dismantle it." "I don't want to dismantle Skyward," Desmond corrected. "I want to transform it into a company where excellence and inclusion aren't seen as contradictory goals." "Noble speech," Phillips sneered. "But I have resources you can't imagine, connections throughout the industry and government. If you continue this hostile action, I'll ensure your reputation is destroyed." "There are ways to make financial irregularities appear where none exist. Desmond had anticipated threats, but the explicitly criminal nature of Phillips's suggestion confirmed his worst assessment of the man's character. "That would be unwise," Desmond said, quietly reaching into his jacket pocket and placing his phone on the table, "especially given that this conversation is being recorded." Phillips' face drained of color. "Illinois is a two-party consent state for recordings," he stammered. "Correct," Desmond acknowledged, "but threatening criminal action against someone isn't protected speech. It falls under extortion exceptions in most jurisdictions, including this one." Phillips glanced around nervously. "No one would believe that you threatened to fabricate financial irregularities to protect your position. I think the SEC and your board would find it quite credible, especially combined with other evidence we've gathered." Desmond put away his phone and stood. "By the way, Zenith Capital currently controls approximately 22% of Skyward Holdings' voting shares. We've identified serious governance failures that have damaged shareholder value, and we're prepared to address them through all available means." Phillips' shock was evident. 22%? That's impossible. Our monitors would have— "Your monitoring systems are as outdated as your management philosophy," Desmond replied. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to." As he turned to leave, Phillips grabbed his arm. "This isn't over, Washington. No one takes what's mine." Desmond looked pointedly at the hand on his arm until Phillips released him. "Skyward Holdings doesn't belong to you, Warren. It belongs to its shareholders. And soon they'll decide who should lead it into the future." As Desmond walked away, he could feel Phillips' glare burning into his back. The confrontation had confirmed everything his research had suggested about the man, entitled, resistant to change and willing to cross ethical lines to maintain control. The recording would be powerful leverage if needed, though Desmond hoped to win based on business merits rather than personal misconduct. What Phillips couldn't know was that Desmond's team had spent the duration of the dinner finalizing arrangements with journalist Alicia Bennett. By morning, the business world would be reading an exposé that would fundamentally alter the battle for Skyward Holdings, and Phillips's carefully managed reputation would never be the same. Alicia Bennett's article in the Wall Street Journal hit the digital edition at 5:00 a.m. and the print edition by 6:30 a.m. The headline alone sent shockwaves through the business community. "Pattern of racial discrimination alleged at Atlantic Airways. CEO Phillips recorded making threats against black investor." The exposé was meticulously researched and devastating in its scope. It detailed dozens of discrimination incidents at Atlantic Airways, supported by testimony from current and former employees. It analyzed the company's history of confidential settlements without meaningful policy changes. Most damaging was a partial transcript of Phillips' conversation with Desmond, including the threat to fabricate financial improprieties. By market opening, Skyward Holdings stock had plunged 28% in pre-market trading. CNBC, Bloomberg, and Fox Business all led with the story. Investment analysts issued downgrades, and social media erupted with calls for boycotts of Atlantic Airways. In his office at Skyward headquarters, Phillips barked orders at increasingly panicked executives. Deny everything. Say the recording was manipulated. Call it a hit piece from a hostile investor. The company's general counsel looked ashen. "Sir, denying documented incidents could expose us to additional liability. And if Washington releases the full recording—" "He won't," Phillips insisted. "It would damage the company's value, and he wants to acquire it. He's bluffing." The chief communications officer looked skeptical. The article mentions 16 separate discrimination incidents with signed affidavits. "Social media is overwhelming. Number boycott Atlantic is the top trending topic nationally." Phillips's response was cut short by a call from the board chair requesting his immediate presence at an emergency meeting. The boardroom atmosphere was glacial when Phillips arrived. Board members sat stone-faced around the table, copies of the Wall Street Journal spread before them. The chair, Eleanor Winters, A formidable former airline executive who had supported Phillips throughout his tenure looked grim. "Warren, we need your explanation of these allegations." Phillips launched into a practice defense, dismissing the discrimination claims as isolated incidents magnified by a hostile investor. "Washington is attempting to drive down our stock price to acquire the company cheaply. This is a coordinated attack on our reputation." Rachel Torres, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up. "That doesn't explain the recording of you threatening to fabricate financial improprieties against him." Taken out of context, Phillips insisted. "I was merely warning him about the scrutiny hostile takeovers face. By suggesting you would personally ensure false allegations were made against him," Torres pressed. Phillips' face reddened. "I was protecting this company from an outsider with no aviation experience." An outsider with an impressive track record of corporate turnarounds, corrected another board member, Harold Chen. His leadership at Maxitech increased shareholder value by 64% in 18 months. The discussion grew increasingly heated as more board members questioned Phillips' handling of both the discrimination complaints and the Washington situation. What had begun as a solid wall of support was cracking visibly. Eleanor Winters finally interrupted the deteriorating exchange. "The immediate issue is our response to this crisis. Our stock is in free fall. Customers are canceling bookings, and institutional investors are demanding answers. We issue a strong denial and weather the storm," Phillips insisted. "This will blow over." Rachel Torres shook her head. "The evidence is too substantial for simple denial. We need to acknowledge the issues, commit to independent investigation, and take concrete steps to address discrimination." "That admits guilt," Phillips protested. "It demonstrates responsibility," Torres countered. "There's a difference." The meeting ended with a compromise position, a statement acknowledging the concern's promising investigation, but neither confirming nor denying specific allegations. Phillips considered it a temporary victory, but the unified board support he had long enjoyed was clearly fracturing. Outside the boardroom, the crisis deepened. Major corporate clients suspended their travel contracts with Atlantic Airways pending review. The Association of Flight Attendants issued a statement supporting employees who had spoken out about discrimination. Celebrity influencers shared their own negative experiences on Atlantic flights, amplifying the boycott movement. Institutional investors began publicly questioning Skyward's leadership. Jordan Hayes of BlackRock gave a damaging interview on CNBC. These allegations reflect governance failures that demand immediate board action. The recorded threats by CEO Phillips are particularly troubling from a fiduciary perspective. By afternoon, Desmond Washington had formally called for a special shareholder meeting to vote on new board members, a first step toward changing management. His press release was measured but pointed. Skyward Holdings possesses strong fundamental assets, but requires leadership committed to both operational excellence and ethical treatment of all customers and employees. The statement resonated with both financial analysts and the broader public. Unlike Phillips' defensive posturing, Desmond's approach acknowledged shareholder concerns while offering a positive vision forward. Social media responses showed the public largely viewed him as a potential reformer rather than an opportunistic raider. Phillips made a critical error that evening by agreeing to a live interview on Bloomberg television. Visibly tense and repeatedly interrupting the interviewer, he dismissed discrimination allegations as invented grievances and suggested minority passengers were more likely to complain about standard procedures. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Civil rights organizations condemned his comments. The hashtag #PhillipsMustGo began trending. By midnight, 3 board members had privately contacted the chair, suggesting Phillips should take a leave of absence until the situation stabilized. The following morning, Skyward's largest institutional investors held an unprecedented joint call with select board members, excluding Phillips. Their message was unambiguous: the current leadership had lost their confidence. Either the board would address the situation or they would support Washington's proposal for new directors. Phillips' learning of the call through his remaining allies grew increasingly isolated and desperate. He contacted Desmond directly, his tone markedly different from their previous meeting. "Washington, let's discuss this reasonably. There's no need for a public spectacle that damages everyone's interests. I'm prepared to offer you a board seat and significant policy input." "This isn't about securing positions for myself," Desmond replied. "It's about fundamental transformation of a company culture that has normalized discrimination." "What do you want then?" Phillips demanded. "The special shareholder meeting will proceed as scheduled," Desmond said firmly. "Shareholders deserve the opportunity to decide the company's direction." The date for the special meeting was set for 3 weeks later. As preparations intensified on both sides, Rachel Torres and 4 other board members privately met with Desmond to discuss his vision for the company. They emerged from the meeting visibly impressed. "He understands the airline business better than we expected," Torres later confided to Eleanor Winters. "His team has identified operational inefficiencies we've overlooked for years, and his approach to cultural transformation is both principled and practical." Phillips made a final desperate play the day before the shareholder meeting, offering to purchase Desmond's Skyward holdings at a 40% premium over market value, a deal that would have netted Desmond over $300 million in profit. For a moment, Desmond considered the offer not for its financial benefits, but for what it represented. Phillips finally acknowledging his position was untenable. But accepting would mean leaving Skyward's systemic issues unaddressed, allowing the discriminatory culture to continue under slightly different management. "I appreciate the offer," Desmond told Phillips, "but this was never about money. It's about creating lasting change in an industry with a troubling history of exclusion." As shareholders gathered the next morning at Chicago's Grand Hyatt for the special meeting, the outcome remained uncertain. Desmond's team had secured commitments from investors controlling approximately 49% of voting shares, tantalizingly close to the majority needed, but not quite there. The meeting began with procedural matters, followed by presentations from both Phillips and Desmond. Phillips emphasized his long experience in aviation and warned of disruption under new leadership. Desmond presented a detailed transformation plan, addressing both operational improvements and cultural change, backed by clear metrics and accountability measures. The shareholder vote proceeded with palpable tension in the room. When the results were finally announced, a hush fell over the assembled executives, investors, and media representatives. The shareholder proposal for new board members has passed with 52.7% of votes in favor, the corporate secretary announced. Phillips sat motionless, his face ashen. After 9 years at the helm of Skyward Holdings, his leadership had been rejected by the company's owners. The newly elected board members would undoubtedly replace him as CEO. As the meeting adjourned, Desmond approached Phillips and extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Phillips shook it briefly. "The airline has been my life," Phillips said quietly. "It will continue to thrive," Desmond assured him, "just with a culture that values everyone equally." That afternoon, the newly constituted board voted unanimously to accept Desmond's tender offer for the remaining Skyward Holdings shares. 3 years after being humiliated on an Atlantic Airways flight, Desmond Washington had achieved complete ownership of the company. But acquiring control was just the beginning. The real challenge, transforming a deeply entrenched corporate culture, still lay ahead. The weeks following the shareholder vote were a whirlwind of activity. The newly constituted Skyward Holdings board moved quickly to implement leadership changes, with Warren Phillips accepting a generous retirement package in exchange for a smooth transition. Rachel Torres was appointed interim CEO while a search committee considered permanent candidates. Behind the scenes, frantic negotiations continued. Some shareholders who had initially supported Phillips now scrambled to align themselves with a new regime, offering enthusiastic endorsements of Desmond's vision for the company. Others remained skeptical, watching closely for any missteps that might vindicate their opposition. Desmond established a transition headquarters on the 47th floor of a Chicago office tower 2 blocks from Skyward's corporate offices. His team worked around the clock, analyzing every aspect of the airline's operations while developing detailed implementation plans for cultural transformation. "We have one chance to get this right," Desmond told his leadership team during a strategy session. "The industry is watching to see if we're serious about change or just making cosmetic adjustments to justify the acquisition." The airline industry had indeed taken notice. Competitors alternated between dismissive comments about activist investors overreaching and nervous assessments of how Desmond's approach might reshape passenger expectations industry-wide. Aviation analysts debated whether a financial expert without airline-specific experience could successfully transform such a complex operation. With the tender offer for remaining shares proceeding, Desmond began the delicate process of integrating his vision while respecting the expertise of career aviation professionals. He conducted listening sessions with employees at all levels, from baggage handlers to senior executives, seeking to understand their perspectives on the company's strengths and challenges. A pivotal moment came during his meeting with Atlantic Airways pilot union representatives. The group, predominantly older white men, arrived with visible skepticism about their company's new owner. "With respect, Mr. Washington," the chief representative began, "pilots have unique concerns about leadership changes. Safety is our priority, and we worry that cost-cutting measures—" "Let me stop you there," Desmond interjected politely. "Safety will never be compromised under my leadership. In fact, I believe our current safety culture needs strengthening, not weakening." He proceeded to outline specific investments in pilot training, fatigue management, and maintenance protocols that exceeded industry standards. By meeting's end, the pilots' initial wariness had given way to cautious optimism. Similar breakthroughs occurred throughout the organization, as Desmond demonstrated both respect for aviation expertise and unwavering commitment to cultural transformation. He assembled a transition team that balanced industry veterans with change management specialists, ensuring decisions reflected both operational realities and best practices in corporate culture evolution. The day before the tender offer was scheduled to close, Warren Phillips made one final attempt to derail the acquisition. He arranged a private meeting with Desmond at the same Metropolitan Club where they had previously confronted each other, though this time Desmond was welcomed as an honored guest rather than being stopped at the door. "I've been reflecting on our situation." Phillips began, his tone conciliatory. "Perhaps I've been too resistant to change. I'm prepared to offer you a tremendous premium for your shares, 60% above current market value. You would realize billions in profit, while I maintain operational control under a new governance structure that addresses your concerns." The offer was astonishingly generous, a desperate gambit that would have netted Desmond personally over $4 billion in profit. For a moment, he considered what such resources could accomplish if directed toward other worthy causes. The temptation was real and substantial. Desmond took a sip of water, using the moment to collect his thoughts. Money had never been his primary motivation, but the scale of this offer demanded serious consideration. He could fund hundreds of scholarships, invest in minority businesses, support civil rights organizations, all worthy pursuits. Yet accepting would mean leaving Skyward's transformation incomplete. The discriminatory culture that had humiliated him and countless others would remain, perhaps moderated by new policies, but fundamentally unchanged in its power dynamics and underlying assumptions. "I appreciate the offer," Warren Desmond finally replied. "It's exceptionally generous, but this was never primarily about financial gain. It's about creating lasting change in an industry with a troubling history of exclusion. I need to decline." Phillips's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake. Running an airline is nothing like your investment projects. The operational complexities will overwhelm you." Perhaps Desmond acknowledged, But I've assembled a team with deep aviation experience to guide those aspects. What they lacked was the will to create an inclusive culture where everyone is treated with dignity. That's what I bring to the equation. The following morning, the tender offer closed successfully. With final regulatory approvals secured, Desmond Washington achieved controlling ownership of Skyward Holdings, the parent company of Atlantic Airways. The financial press described it as one of the most significant corporate takeovers of the year, while social justice advocates hailed it as a watershed moment for accountability in corporate America. The shareholder meeting to formalize the new ownership structure was held at Skyward's corporate headquarters. Employees lined the corridors, curious to see the investor who had upended their company's leadership after being discriminated against on one of their flights. The boardroom was packed with executives, major investors, and media representatives. Rachel Torres, still serving as interim CEO, opened the meeting with a formal welcome to Desmond as the company's new controlling shareholder. When Desmond rose to address the room, he spoke without notes, his voice calm but resolute. Today marks not an ending, but a beginning. Skyward Holdings possesses extraordinary assets, modern aircraft, valuable routes, and most importantly, talented people. What it has lacked is a culture that values every employee and passenger equally, regardless of race, gender, religion, or background. He outlined his vision for transformation: concrete policy changes, mandatory anti-discrimination training, new accountability structures, and diversity initiatives tied to executive compensation. Some have questioned whether focusing on inclusion will distract from operational performance, he acknowledged. I believe the opposite is true. When everyone can contribute their best without fear of discrimination, when all passengers feel valued and respected, our service improves, our reputation strengthens, and our financial results follow. As the meeting concluded, Desmond announced his first major decision. Rather than installing himself as CEO, as many had expected, he would serve as executive chairman while appointing Rachel Torres as permanent CEO. The move signaled both confidence in the existing talent within the organization and commitment to balanced leadership rather than autocratic control. Ms. Torres combines deep operational knowledge with genuine commitment to cultural transformation, Desmond explained. Together with our new executive team, we will build an airline that leads the industry in both performance and inclusivity. The announcement sent Skyward's stock price surging 12% by day's end, a vote of confidence from markets that had initially been skeptical of Desmond's plans. Industry analysts noted that the leadership structure leveraged both Torres's aviation expertise and Desmond's change management skills, a potentially powerful combination. As photographers captured images of Desmond and Torres shaking hands symbolizing the new partnership that would lead Skyward Holdings, few noticed a woman watching from the back of the room, Brenda Miller, the flight attendant who had removed Desmond from first class 3 months earlier. Her expression reflected complicated emotions: uncertainty about her future under new leadership, but also a dawning recognition of the accountability now entering a system that had previously insulated discriminatory behavior. What she couldn't know was that Desmond had already reviewed her personnel file and made a decision about her fate, one that would reflect his philosophy about justice and transformation far more profoundly than simple retribution ever could. 6 months after acquiring Skyward Holdings, Desmond Washington stood in the spacious atrium of the company's headquarters, addressing all employees via live stream. Sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, symbolizing the transparency he had worked to instill throughout the organization. Today marks an important milestone in our transformation journey, he began. Our quarterly results demonstrate that ethical business practices and financial performance aren't contradictory goals, they're complementary strengths. The numbers projected behind him told a compelling story. Customer satisfaction scores had reached their highest level in the company's history. Employee retention had improved 27%. Most importantly, Skyward's stock had outperformed the airline industry index by 18% since the leadership change. These results weren't achieved through financial engineering or cost-cutting. Desmond continued. They came from unleashing the full potential of our workforce by creating an environment where everyone feels valued and respected. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Some longtime executives had resigned rather than adapt to new expectations around inclusivity. Industry competitors had attempted to poach valuable employees during the transition. Certain institutional investors had questioned whether the emphasis on corporate culture would distract from operational performance. Yet the results had gradually silenced the skeptics. Atlantic Airways' new training protocols for addressing unconscious bias had become a case study at leading business schools. Their revamped customer service approach had won industry awards. Most tellingly, other airlines had begun implementing similar initiatives, recognizing that inclusive practices weren't just morally right, but competitively advantageous. After the company address, Desmond met with a group of flight attendants participating in the new mentorship program. Among them was Brenda Miller, the attendant who had removed him from first class months earlier. Rather than firing her as many had expected, Desmond had taken a different approach. After reviewing her personnel record, which showed generally positive performance reviews but several concerning passenger complaints from minority travelers, he had enrolled her in the company's comprehensive bias awareness training program. The meeting in his office was their first direct interaction since the flight incident. Brenda appeared nervous, but composed. Miss Miller, Desmond greeted her warmly. Your training supervisors tell me you've become one of our most enthusiastic participants in the cultural transformation program. It's been enlightening, Mr. Washington, she replied, her voice reflecting genuine emotion. I never thought of myself as prejudiced, but the training helped me recognize patterns in my behavior I hadn't been conscious of. That's exactly the point, Desmond nodded. Most discrimination isn't driven by hatred but by unconscious biases we all absorb from society. The difference is whether we're willing to recognize and address those biases. Brenda hesitated before continuing. I want to apologize for how I treated you on that flight. There was no valid reason to question your first-class ticket or move you to economy. I've been thinking a lot about why I did that, and the training has helped me understand my own implicit assumptions. Apology accepted, Desmond replied simply. But more important than my forgiveness is your commitment to treating all passengers with equal respect going forward. That's why I volunteered to become a peer trainer for the program, Brenda said. I want to help others recognize what I didn't see in myself. Later that afternoon, Desmond met with Rachel Torres to review the company's scholarship initiative for underprivileged youth interested in aviation careers. The program launched 3 months after the acquisition provided comprehensive support from high school through professional training. Applications are running at 3 times our projections, Torres reported. We've identified 75 exceptional candidates for the first cohort with particular strength among young women and minorities who have traditionally been underrepresented in aviation. Expand the program, Desmond decided immediately. Accept all 75. The talent pipeline is our future, and diversity within that pipeline ensures we never return to the homogeneous thinking that limited this company before. The scholarship program exemplified Desmond's approach to transformation, addressing not just current practices, but the systemic factors that had created and maintained the previous culture. By investing in diverse talent early, Skyward was ensuring that inclusion would become self-sustaining rather than dependent on continuous intervention. Similar initiatives throughout the company had gradually shifted employee perceptions from skepticism about corporate diversity talk to enthusiasm for genuine cultural evolution. The changes weren't merely policies imposed from above, but values increasingly embraced throughout the organization. That evening, Desmond boarded an Atlantic Airways flight from Chicago to Los Angeles. As he settled into his first-class seat, he noticed the lead flight attendant was Thomas Reed, the same man who had stood beside Brenda Miller during the original incident. "Good evening, Mr. Washington," Reed greeted him professionally. "Welcome aboard." There was no excess deference in his tone, just the same courteous treatment extended to all passengers, exactly as it should be. Midway through the flight, Desmond observed a young black girl, perhaps 12 years old, walking past the first-class cabin toward the lavatory. She glanced curiously at the premium section, perhaps imagining herself there someday. "Excuse me," Desmond called gently. The girl paused, looking uncertain. "Are you interested in aviation?" She nodded shyly. "I want to be a pilot. My science teacher took our class to the airport and I got to sit in the cockpit of a simulator." "That's wonderful," Desmond smiled, reaching for his business card. "When you're ready for college, call this number. We have a scholarship program for future aviators." The girl accepted the card with wide eyes, reading Desmond Washington, Executive Chairman, Skyward Holdings. "Thank you, sir," she managed, carefully tucking the card into her pocket. As she continued toward the lavatory, Desmond felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun with discrimination had transformed into opportunity, not just for himself, but for others who would face fewer barriers because of the changes he had initiated. The Atlantic Airways flight attendant, who had once told him he didn't look like he belonged in first class, now led training sessions on inclusive customer service. The airline that had humiliated him now set industry standards for equitable treatment. The corporate culture that had enabled discrimination now actively promoted diversity at every level. Looking out the window at the sunset, painting the clouds in brilliant hues, Desmond reflected that true success wasn't measured by wealth accumulated or power attained, but by systems transformed and opportunities created. By that standard, his acquisition of Skyward Holdings counted among his greatest achievements, not because it had satisfied a desire for revenge, but because it had converted an instrument of injustice into a vehicle for positive change. Desmond Washington's journey teaches us that responding to discrimination requires strategy rather than just emotional reaction. When faced with injustice, he chose calculated action over public outrage, transforming an entire corporate culture instead of seeking personal vindication. His approach demonstrates that systemic change demands patience, planning, and persistence. True power lies not in the ability to punish those who wronged you, but in creating systems where such wrongs become impossible. By focusing on cultural transformation rather than retribution, Desmond ensured lasting impact beyond his personal experience. The story also illustrates how privilege often blinds people to discrimination until they're forced to confront it directly. Phillips couldn't recognize the toxic culture he'd created because it never affected him personally. This blindness is what allows discriminatory systems to persist. Perhaps most importantly, Desmond's decision to educate rather than terminate Brenda Miller reveals that breaking cycles of discrimination requires creating opportunities for growth and understanding. Real change comes not from removing problematic individuals, but from transforming mindsets and institutional practices. The airline's subsequent success proves that ethical business practices and financial performance aren't contradictory goals. By valuing every employee and customer equally, organizations unlock their full potential and create sustainable competitive advantages. What discrimination have you witnessed that made you wish you could change the system? Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice and transformation. Comment below, sharing how you've stood up against discrimination or turned a negative experience into positive change. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs inspiration to fight injustice strategically. Thank you for watching, and remember that sometimes quiet determination accomplishes more than loud confrontation. Together we can build a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect.